Hey everybody, I'm Stevenson. I'm here in the Disciple HQ with something I just whipped together. It doesn't sound great yet, but I'm going to show you how you can take some elements in a track and have them kind of sound sort of mastered and push things through a mix and get everything kind of squared away in a nice way that makes your track sound good. So what we have is this, which I'll play you through. Something like that. That's what we got. So right off the bat, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start limiting. So one thing that's really useful, I find, is when you actually there are a couple problems with this track already that you can hear. Like the kick isn't really very frontal, and the stick sort of snare sound isn't really cutting it. It doesn't sound like it's in the same sort of place. I mean, everything's there and it sounds all right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an ozone just for the limiter. And one thing that's really cool to do with limiters is you create because you're creating a topping out point, you put that just above your main elements, not including your drums. And so you keep those elements kind of safe from the limiter. So if I just mute the kick and the snares, so you end up with something like this. So you get it so that it's not really hitting those parts. Let's reintroduce the kick and the snare. Kick and the snare. So what you can do now is if you start pushing your kick and snare way through that limiter, you actually start adding a second layer of sidechaining in a way. So I'm just going to turn this kick up into this. Where are you? Kick. So you see how that kick's kind of pushing through in a much nicer way right now. Like, it is technically distorting, but I kind of like that. I kind of like that about it. So this is a trick that you can do to actually add more transients into your kick and snares as well. As if you, so right now we're just doing the kick, but if you grab your kick and duplicate it like this. So, oops. So what we're going to do here is we've got the same kick underneath it. This is a kick I made earlier. And you just grab a little bit of the transient and a little bit of the first initial low end. What you can do is if I bring this in slowly, I'll just loop this little section. You see, you get so much more versus that. What's happening is if I take the limiter off that, for example, see how much louder that is than the track? It's way too loud unless you're limiting. But what happens when you put the limiter on is it chokes out the entire track, and you get this kind of suction for just a little second where it gets rid of every other sound because it's so loud and the limiter has to work so hard to get it back into place. So I'm going to duplicate that trick to all the times that the kick hits, just to make sure, apart from any of these fast ones. Real quick. Come on. So same principle over here. So now we'll have, so it sounds a little loud at the moment, but that's, I think, because we could probably do with limiting it a little harder. Oops. Right. So right now this rim hit, it's kind of getting lost a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to give it maybe a little bit of low end. And we're going to do the exact same thing with that rim. And again, there's like a little roll in the middle that I'm not going to do. Not going to do that too, because you'll lose any of the kind of. Actually, no, I'm going to do it to it. I'm going to do it too because there's only 2 hits. So you see, you look for kind of where it's punching, and boost that through the limit. So in theory, that should be banging through. Yeah, so let's have a listen to how that sounds properly right now. versus that. That's how it was before. See how that's suddenly really frontal? Like, ideally when you're mixing, what you want to be doing is making things kind of suggest themselves as the main elements as they come forward. I mean, you want everything to be visible audio-wise. It's a strange concept, but so like this is quite a simple mix because you have the bass, you have that lead, and you have some drums. It's not that hard to get things up close, but it is hard to get that sort of stuff sounding loud. Right now, this is pretty loud and it's in a good place. This lead right now is a little bit dry for my liking. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a dimension expander, you know, kind of standard stuff. That suddenly feels like a main element instead of being kind of boring. Suggests itself, maybe a little reverb, nothing crazy. One thing that I'm interested in trying with this that I don't know if this will work or not, so maybe we'll cut this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this. Oh, it's already being sent to its own bus. I'm going to sidechain the bass sound, which is quite flat. It's got a lot. It's got a lot to it. Like it's filling pretty much the entire spectrum. You can do this quite often with like pads as well. You can have it sidechain using maybe something like Pro MB. Let's do this from scratch. From Pro MB, so bus 6, which is here, is where the lead's getting sent to. You can have it sidechain so that it ducks certain areas, but only certain areas. So it's basically adaptive EQing to the lead. So, and then it comes back up. So what that means is you can generally start pushing sounds a little bit louder because they're making way for each other. It's a bit like why you would sidechain your bass and your kick to your bass to your kick and snare, so that you get that ducking, and you know it makes the kick and snare more important. It makes them punch more. It makes them stand forward in the mix whenever they hit. You're doing something similar with the lead and the bass here. So. Kind of losing those hi-hats. Right now I'm just turning everything up, I guess. A little bit too, I reckon there's a little bit too much high end in that. Another thing with tracks like, with a lot of tracks that you have like quite frontal and bright sounds, and ones that are pretty dry as well, like even though we've got reverbs and stuff, this is still a quite dry sounding track. Having a element that is really wet and like spacious, right here I've got this one. You know, washed out, loads of reverb. These kind of sounds, if you put these over these kinds of tracks and have them a little further back, they can really create a sound stage for everything. So see how it's kind of like cruising along. You put it in a space because something has space. So some little tips for you guys in your low end. This sound currently is very full spectrum. You can see on this analyzer. Often I've found that this kind of like 150 to 200, 300 kind of area is a little bit unnecessary in most cases for a bass sound. So what I'm going to do, just get rid of a little of this here. It's encroaching a little on the sub, so we're going to make sure it's not actually getting rid of any of our bass. Yeah, something like that. Let's just compare it to what we had earlier real quick, see if we're making good progress. Before you do any hard mixing, it's nice to bounce out what you had before, because if you're making, you know, steps in the wrong direction, you can always hear that at this point. To me, that sounds a little more lifeless compared to what we have now, which is I think we're making good progress. So, low end. A great trick that I've been doing for years with low end is if you low pass your entire mix and you get an oscilloscope. I'll show you one of those in a second. The one I use is a freeware one, so you can go out and grab that right after this video. After you like and subscribe, of course. So you get your low end. Okay, so we're already in a good place. What you're looking for here is that you're not really dropping anything. So this is perfect for me. This is exactly what I'm looking for. I'll freeze that. So here is where the kick ends and here's where the sub begins. If you're monitoring your stuff on an oscilloscope, you want to be looking for that. A lot of mixes, even by some amazing producers, can have what's called bow tying, and I'll quickly show you what that looks like because it's something you want to avoid. What it is where the kick has finished and the sub's coming up, and the two things, either the sub is coming back in too slowly or too late, so you have a dropout where the kick's ended and the sub's still coming in, or the two things, the tail of the kick is interfering with the sub on its way in, both of which are things that will mean that you have less low end in your tune. Nightmare. So what we're going to do here is I'll show you how I've ended up with phase like this, because that's ideal. Like, that's about as good as I've ever got it. And part of that is actually because of the limiting. If you're limiting things quite hard, then like if you're limiting the kick quite hard into things with a fast limiter like on Ozone, then it's going to let those little quiet bits come back up when it's quiet. So where am I sidechaining this? I haven't checked yet. Here it is. So this is something I do for most of my bass sidechains, is I'll sidechain the low end and the high end differently to each other. So for example, I've got this low end trigger set to just a channel here, which is just like a kick trigger. You can see what that's doing. And so what bow tying looks like is, let's just get these two. Let's just get the kick and the sub. Where are you? Okay, so here's that. Bow tying looks like this. Now that's some pretty extreme bow tying, or you could have like phase issues like this, where you like, see there? See here, we're getting very, very dirty, kind of screwed up peaks and troughs, which basically just means that it's going to rumble and sound muddy and bad. So what I do is I'll sidechain hard and fast, just to a kick trigger until something looks about right, like that. That's what we're looking for. See, there's still some problems there, but that's bow tying. All right, that's cool. That looks about right to me. So basically, what this means, the reason that you look out for these neat shapes is because then the low end itself is neat and metered and it's nice and it's always there when you want it to be. Because you could add a pause and you don't want low end there. But yeah. That's one of the useful things for mixing low end. And then the high end, I'll do just like pretty much anything else, where you'll just have a ghost trigger and you're just, oh, still low passed. Where are you? To the kick and the snare, or like on a ghost channel. Which, for those who don't know what a ghost channel is, I just have this little channel here, which is just making those clicks. They're triggering the sidechain compressor to duck all the sound so that there's room for the kick and snare. But I feel like a lot of you probably already know that. If not, then you should look up sidechain compression, because it's a very, very common dance technique thing. All right, so there's something about the top end in that lead melody that's annoying me. It's got a kind of too much of a hissy, kind of dry quality to it. There's a couple things we can do about it, and I'll show you a few of them. So I love FabFilter plugins. I love FabFilter Saturn. The tape, the warm tape mode on high end can really soften things out. It stops making it sound as, I guess, grating often. So I'm going to get just on the top end, which sounds like. And then if you like, see how that's got a kind of softness to it. still just as much high end, it's just a little bit nicer and easier to listen to. Then you just level match it. So versus, see, it's got a kind of softer edge to it. Another thing you can do, which I might do both in this case, is you can use something like micro shift by Soundtoys to throw that on the sides. So what this plugin does, I'll show you, is it's a chorus that has a cutoff. So here I'm basically making it only put the chorus and the width and the kind of like the wetness on the top end. So let's do that. Let's put it up there, kind of soften that up at the top. Then I'll put a bit of the dry in there too, because otherwise it's just too washed out. Cool. One thing I'll say is this technique for the snare does work with like more like punchy snares. Like, I mean, this snare works better in this track than like a really heavy dubstep snare, but you can use something like that, and you can do the same thing where you layer it over itself and only get the punchy part, and then that's a bit extreme, but other things that you could do with a track like this, I'm not sure. Maybe a little EQ on that. It's good to stereo low cut most things, just so we don't end up with any of these anything here. So I can't hear this on these speakers right now, but you might be able to hear this if you're listening on headphones. But there's some stuff you can see going on in the low end on the sides, which is not ideal at all. So just cutting it in general would be nice. Give it a little peak so that it gets its. So this at this point, this is kind of like a personal choice, is where you kind of like these things to punch through. I kind of like this area. Or maybe that. Cool. So still got a little too much high end for me, so I'm just gonna. That's much nicer for me. Maybe too much reverb. Cool. So one little trick that I do a lot when mastering, and this is a bit of a crazy one. You generate some pink noise somewhere randomly, and you send it to FabFilter Pro Q2. Let me get some pink noise. Okay, so pink noise is, I guess, in terms of human hearing, it's neutral. Every frequency sounds to the human ear roughly the same volume, and on a frequency analyzer, it's completely flat. What this means is we can use this to make a track sound completely flat if we EQ match to it. So this is getting sent to bus. You could do all this in Ableton too, but I don't use Ableton. So this is going to take, oh, whoops, this here. So if you EQ match to your sidechain here with the pink noise, this EQ here is after the master right now, because that's how everything sounds. What's going to happen is this is going to listen to that pink noise at the same time as the track and work out the difference in frequencies between those two things. So you can see here, this is what it's doing. So then it's listened to one repeat. It's got a rough average of how the track sounds. This has now made the track sound really weird. So like what you want to do is you want to, oops, I didn't mean to do that. What you want to do is, wait, where is that? Okay. I had to zoom out. this I'll put back up here. So you want a line that's pretty close to the center, but it's created these little peaks and troughs, which are actually super useful because they completely reshape the tone of the track to a place that's usually much nicer. So for example, I'm gonna dry wet this. So 0%. I'm gonna put it up to 100. It just starts living, becomes real. Really great little mastering technique. The reason I've done that after the master is because if you do it before the master, it's got all those things that are hitting way too loud into the limiter, and then it would account for those in a way, and it would like push those back out in the frequencies because the kick's way too loud, technically. I actually think I'm going to re-EQ that thing. Not sure that's sitting right with me. Something like that, I don't mind. With something like this, it's often quite nice to have a layer underneath quite a busy lead sound. So this is, you know, so the actual patch for this has got like white noise and stuff and distortion, so it's quite far away from its original sound. But I'm going to take it way down to the saw, which is just the heart of that sound. And then I'm going to relayer that back in, because often having something dry like that is a nice thing. I'm just going to move its sidechain onto there and not have any reverb on it. So if I get rid of it, it's a little further away. And there you have it. I think that's enough for you to go and play with. Oh, one last thing. I don't know if you noticed, but the groove in this track isn't completely straight and metered. So this is like a drum break that I use sometimes for this sort of stuff. I've sliced it up and put the offbeats on their own channel because I'm delaying them all. So if I take this back to normal, you'll notice that it has a lot less groove. Very straight. All of these offbeats are the tiniest bit swung, not to the point where you hear it, but to the point where you feel it slightly. So I'm delaying this by by 22 ticks, which is a tiny amount. On a grid, it's about it's about like 1/10 of a 16th. It's not a lot at all, but when you listen to it, gives you that kind of cruising, lazy feel, which I've been really into recently. So that's another like little bit of food for thought. Don't necessarily have things being straight up 8s or 16s or whatever. You can pull people along. If the beats, I mean, like there's a video on YouTube of a guy called Jacob Collier talking about this, or Jacob Collier, I don't know how to say his name, and he says that it's really interesting if the beat rolls like an egg, and I completely agree with him. Let's just compare this with what we had earlier. Versus, and I'll get rid of the EQ and we've done some good work, I think. But yeah, let's play it, listen back. The crash is probably a little quiet at this point, but yeah. Oh, put the master back on. Alright guys, I hope you've enjoyed this little insight into how I mix my tracks. If anything's been useful, please let me know. If there's anything that you were confused about, maybe tweet at me or leave your comments in the description. I'm sure I can help you out. Some of this stuff is kind of against the rules in a way, like deliberately distorting your kick and snare through the master, for example. Mastering engineers won't like you for that. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that's really important is if it sounds good to you, then that's good. Like and subscribe, and if you want to check me out, I'm sure there are some links below. Peace, everybody. Have a good night.